our most wanted leak list a little more in detail, and also talk about documents, the nature of documents, and especially the nature of sourcing documents in particular. So by what means these documents might come to us, by what means people can get access to interesting documentation, or where documents in society are even placed or where they can be found. So it's a kind of a complex topic, but we'll hopefully be able to cover this in some detail as well. I'm just waiting for an extension for the video so we can put up the list on the beamers, and I think meanwhile maybe Julian will be talking to you a bit about sourcing documents.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay, so this is going to be a fairly interactive presentation, mostly because we don't have a whole lot of material and the VGA cable's not working, but also the nature of what we're doing and what we hope you will do really requires that. So first of all, how many people were at the first talk at 12 today? Great. Is there anyone who wasn't at the talk at 12 today? Wow. Wow. Okay, so it's about half and half. So is there anyone who doesn't know approximately what WikiLeaks is? A couple. Okay. So for those couple who don't know or have probably been misled by the yellow press, WikiLeaks is a project of Sunshine Press. Sunshine Press is a collaboration between journalists, technical people, cyberpunks, some anti-corruption people, and some fairly famous civil rights activists to try and get as many documents as possible out onto the internet that have never been released before that will produce positive political reforms. So get them out where they haven't been published before and also get them in. So that means providing censorship resistance for publication and also sourcing anonymization for sourcing. So 2 people are affected by retributive acts for documents that are published: publishers, journalists who work on stories about those documents, and also sources who provide those documents. So that whole pipeline needs to be protected. And we try and do this with technology, with law by picking correct jurisdictions and by having a good legal team, and by politics, by the real politic, which means making it very unprofitable in a political sense and in a legal sense and sometimes financial sense to sue us. So as an example, Bank Julius Baer, who did try and sue us in California last year and did not succeed, suffered a cost of $300 million for their attempt to sue us in the reduction of their stock price and in the cancelling of the US IPO. So people have seen that attacking us, while you might be able to do it legally, is actually not in the interests of the corporation that is doing it. Although sometimes it is in the interests of the lawyers who are doing it, even though it's not in the interests of their clients. So I want to give maybe just one example to begin with, and then we'll ask some questions about what type of documents you might be able to help us get out to the public. So when you think of a document that might achieve significant political reform, you're probably thinking something like these torture memos by you, as an example, in the United States. Something that may be top secret, it may be vaulted, very limited number of people have it, it may not even be in electronic form. Those things are hard to get. Sometimes we get them electronically, but usually for those very, very restricted documents, it's people in a political circle or intelligence circle who have access to that material it's being distributed to. And so it's come to us at a fairly high level. Sometimes it comes at a much lower level, so consultants going into some place, or a janitor or secretary, or someone finding a USB stick on the train, or a web admin or a computer hacker working for an intelligence agency or the police will give us that material. But there are other types of material that are sort of, if you're targeting them, you've got a fairly good chance of success, and there's usually not too much legal complication. So an example is the Congressional Research Service reports that we released from the United States Congress earlier this year. So we released about 6,800 Congressional Research Service reports. The CRS is Congress's intelligence arm. It's intelligence analytical arm. It's worth about $100 million per year. And it produces reports on all legislation before Congress and issues of contention in the United States. And congressional members can release these reports if they feel it fits their political agenda. And sometimes they do. Maybe a third of reports are released. They're also very frequently updated. They're topical. Now, we received information about a small vulnerability inside the Congress's document distribution system. So this is a very trivial vulnerability that has to do with HTTP headers. I don't want to specify exactly what that is, but it is not complex. Any one of you here could have found it if you were looking for that material. This is not about exploiting a security vulnerability in Apache or some complex vulnerability in Ethernet driver. This is what any one of you would find if you were actually looking. Now, US government documents are uncopyrightable as a matter of law. So if you get them out, there's no problem with distribution afterwards. In terms of classifications, there's no problems with breaking those classifications as a matter of law if you're giving them to a press organization and you're not a serving member of the United States military. So CIA agents, as an example, can leak top secret classified documents as a matter of law to the press without any retribution. Top secret is just a label that's stamped on something by a bureaucrat. It means nothing as a matter of law. Of course, as a matter of practice, you may be harassed a bit. Sorry, not you, but people who are employees and who are discovered may be harassed a bit. But there has actually never been a successful case of prosecuting someone in the United States for leaking a top secret document to the United States press, including that of Daniel Ellsberg. Okay, so maybe I'll ask the first question, why Daniel is still working on this. So a question about sourcing. I should say that I am a journalist and I had many years of experience in dealing with secret documents from all around the world and protecting sources. I have never lost a source to my knowledge. Wikileaks has never lost a source to its knowledge. So it's actually a lot easier than many people think. You hear about all the cases that fail. Whenever you see in the newspaper, maybe the first third of the New York Times on a good day is actually all based upon leaks. And you will just see documents seen by the New York Times. And no one actually thinks, no one imagines in their head that behind documents seen by the New York Times is actually a source of some kind that has come forward quite successfully and then gone back on with their life or enjoyed their moment of fame, but privately. But when someone is caught, on those rare occasions, then of course it becomes a bit of a cause célèbre, so that's what sticks in people's head. But sourcing is actually incredibly safe, in my experience. Okay, so question. Anyone? Okay, just a second, sorry, the video is up. So, for those people who weren't at the talk earlier, I was approached last year by a Dutch IT consultant who said, we really want to help you get this material, and I have access to a lot of stuff, but I don't know which stuff is going to have political impact and which stuff journalists are interested in. Do you have a list? And no, we didn't have a list, and we thought we would try and make a list. And so I asked around and got our other people to ask around, human rights lawyers in the third world, journalists in Europe and United States, and a whole lot of activists internet activists who nominated material, a lot of censorship-related material. And we put together a list of material that these people want, and have gone through it and tried to organize it. So that list is a great starting point for anyone who doesn't know what to look at or where to look for it. An example that is on that list that, okay, can't see here, for the United States, these big document repositories, like the CRS reports, which is about $1 billion worth of reports that we release for CRS. So in distributing that to the world, if you like, we have released $1 billion worth of public intelligence to the world that has then gone on to be used everywhere. Funnily enough, even the State Department doesn't have access to the stuff by Congress, so all the time we see links and referrals coming in from the State Department, from embassies around the world in the United States. So another example, like that CRS list, good material, is the CIA runs an open source, what it calls open source, which is very different to what you guys mean. But by the intelligence agencies, when they say open source, what they mean is we didn't steal it. When you guys say open source, you mean you can steal it. So anyway, so they comb Facebook, the internet, all the foreign broadcasts they have people listening to and noting them down. Those are all open sources because they're public. But they can be very obscure, and CIA analysts are then paid to analyze these open sources and pull together information. And that can be quite sophisticated, that work, and a lot of money goes into it. So the CIA Open Source Center produces these reports, but it doesn't have to worry about protecting its sources, because its sources are in fact the open media somewhere or something on the internet. But the reports are still can be first rate. And that database has millions of documents in it, from transcripts of overseas, but also these complex analysis of power structures in North Korea, in Iran, any big issue that intelligence managers in the United States want to know about. To get access to that database is not so hard, although how many documents you're transferring per second and things like this is fairly closely watched. So all you have to do to get access to it is to have a .gov email address or a .mil email address. And you write in and ask. You need to give a consistent IP. To use a consistent IP, if you're using Tor, you'll have to use a US exit server or something that is fairly consistent. And so we have received a number of documents from that. Also, Stephen Aftergood from the Federation of American Scientists has had a number of documents from that. But really, what should happen is we should get all documents from that. And all the documents from CIA open source database would be a great bit of information for many people in the world, many people that can't afford, many smaller governments that can't afford to have their own CIA producing reports. So perfectly doable. Another example is the PACER database. So this is actually a public these are public US court records. All the time, big corporations are being sued in the United States under things like the False Claims Act, the Quitam Act, where lawyers get a percentage of the profits of any fines against these corporations. And they're suing each other. But the records are behind a pay system. But the records themselves are completely public. Now, earlier this year, someone squirreled out 10% of the PACER database. The guy who invented RSS, actually. He likes to call that part of the movement which we have in common is guerrilla open source. So opening up these public records, which should be public but for some reason constrained. That has millions and millions of records, and if that was Googleable, all the many activists and lawyers and journalists would be able to discover things in these filings that hasn't previously been revealed. Anyway, big list there for the United States. A lot of important documents. I give these examples as something that we know is achievable. These two previous examples, something we know is achievable, and it's a sizable volume of stuff. You're not just going after one document. So perhaps a question, or do you want to say something? Okay, so question.
Just a comment on the PACER database. I had well, anybody can sign up for an account, but you're right, it does cost money to download those files. With the bankruptcy court filings, they used to have social security numbers of people in those bankruptcy filings, and I pulled down a bunch of it. I don't know if it's censored at this point, but it was all public record.
Yep. I'm not sure what the question was. Comment, okay. Another comment or question?
Yes, I apologize if this was answered in the first lecture. I wasn't here. You talk about a lot about legal protection and how you deal with threats from big governments and big money. How do you deal with physical threats, and were there actually any physical threats or actions against your team, or anything associated with Wikileaks?
Yeah. So a lot of people watch too many American movies. And actually, I have never felt in a position where I'm physically threatened, except in some third world countries in Africa, where 6 armed men broke into my compound at 3 a.m. in the morning to do something. And some colleagues have also suffered. Some were killed, some had to flee a country, but that has to do with they are very public people. They are involved in very, very tense political situation. The writing was very clear to everyone. Some people didn't. A couple of people didn't read that writing and unfortunately were killed. But in European countries, in Western countries, that's not an issue at all. The worst that has happened to us is that we've been followed occasionally. I mean, big deal. I wish every journalist wants to spend a few days in jail, but no more. That's just something you put on the CV or something to tell the grandchildren. And working out how far you can push things to a few days, or so you have to leave the country for a little while and come back, is sort of a intelligence that people develop over time. But if you're anonymous, that's not an issue. If you're in the West and you have someone behind you, especially if you have an organization behind you, a group that's willing to defend you, press that is willing to defend you, that's a non-issue. As long as you, well, maybe an example. Here's what not to do. So we had a guy, son of a Tennessee Democrat, who hacked Sarah Palin's account using a password reset. Actually, a lot of people criticized this guy for, this was a trivial hack, anyone could do it. But actually, only he did do it. So he had enough political sense and the will to do it that he did it. Now, of course, then this was a very young person, and they immediately went and told 4chan all about it under their real name. Okay, so we got the material. We protected him completely from our end, but you know, he gave his handle, a name, and plenty of details to 4chan. So that's an example of what not to do. Just act like an adult, and don't tell all your drinking buddies immediately, and until you see what the political fallout is. Usually, if the political fallout is high, that's good. If you reveal the matter that exposes some injustice, that's usually good, because it means everyone is so busy dealing with the political fallout that they actually have no time to investigate the source. Trying to think of an example where that hasn't been true. For us, I don't think there is one. The Attorney General not the Attorney General, the Inspector General in the United States is still investigating the CRS leak. But you know, it's completely obvious to me. But I don't know why they're still investigating it. It's an obvious thing. Yes, we had. Actually, I won't mention that. But we were given details about how to access that material. But of course, that is not a crime. And in fact, even just giving us all the material is not a crime. If a Congress member gives us all the CRS leaks, this violates a very small Senate rules thing, which is really, you know, not of much consequence. Things that are of consequence is after that leak, a number of US newspapers reported on it, and Senator McCain and Lieberman then proposed to release all of them on a permanent basis, given that they were just being leaked anyway. And that would actually be a great outcome. That bill is still before the Senate, and we'll see what happens.
One more comment, though, on this physical security issue. If you're the way that WikiLeaks is structured is there are many people involved that are addressing parts of the work that needs to be done for this project, and then there's a few people that have that appear on a stage somewhere like here. So maybe these people have a slight higher public exposure, and if there would be physical threats, these people would have to live with that. But I guess anyone who thinks more than 2 minutes about engaging into something like this would realize that there are many more people involved that are still doing this work. So it wouldn't really help intimidating anyone or threatening any single person. It would actually just blow back in your face, because it would become clear maybe who is pressuring someone. This would get publicity. You would maybe have to defend yourself, be very careful about how you approach these things. So it wouldn't really make any sense, at least from my perspective, to put anyone into any physical trouble. And I'm not really scared of anything in that respect. So, and the whole project is structured in a way that no one that is public can be compromised, that then would compromise the whole project in a way that it ceases to exist or cannot be continued anymore, or anything similar to that. So I think that was what your question was aiming at. It's also psychologically very important, if you're doing this, that you do not show that fear, or you do not promote that fear to others. That's a very important part as well, in respect to talking to all of you whom we would like to motivate to do some useful work maybe, as well as to all the sources we have that put much more on the line in some cases than we do. So for us, it's maximum some legal trouble. That is a little uncomfortable, I guess, but for someone who is risking his whole career path, or maybe the stability he can offer for his family by doing something for them, it's a completely different story. So the focus has to be to protecting these people. And that's where also, I guess, a physical end is more important than with what we're doing. Is there any question? Yeah.
Yes, I'm a German journalist, sometimes receiving content which might be of interest from WikiLeaks. Why should I choose WikiLeaks instead of, let's say, a German coalition like Chaos Computer Club, which is always receiving documents and freeing them anonymously?
Okay, so there are a couple of aspects to this question. The first question is in respect to whom to publish with. If you look at what Cryptome, for example, is doing, which on some level might be similar to what we are doing as well. So it is they have a long history of publishing information that partly has been withheld from the public. So the problem is that most websites that might publish this material in fully would not really be able to promote it to the media, to the public. These organizations like the Chaos Computer Club are not existing to actually actively bring material into the public and make sure that it receives attention and that it also receives the impact it deserves. So that might be one point why it's different publishing it with an entity that is journalistically oriented rather than just with an entity that might be interested in the subject. The second point in general is that what we are doing is we're aiming at making sure that the material we publish remains online for the public as a publication for eternity, basically. So in the long run, that's the goal we are aiming at. So the Chaos Computer Club, I think the Chaos Computer Club is maybe a bad example, but any other entity that is not specifically there as a publishing entity might not share the same value for keeping this information online in the same way that you would like to see it online. So there surely are many ways to publish material, but from our perspective, especially if the material is anyhow problematic for you as a source, it's very important that it's done right and that people take care of a lot of detail that comes along with such a submission. I hope that answered. I'm not sure, Julian might have another comment on that.
Yeah, just a small comment on that. If the material is relevant to a particular geographic community, your best way of getting the story out is to publish, say, in some newspaper that is very popular in that region and have that newspaper also release the material concurrently with us. There are problems in that as far as protecting the source is concerned. We've seen many cases where newspapers have not correctly removed metadata information from material they released, and sources have been revealed. As a result, they don't have continual expertise in how to do that. And sometimes the material itself can be legally problematic. Very often newspaper websites will refuse to release any commercial document, as an example. Sometimes in the UK, often any government document, because there's Crown copyright. The United States is quite good for releasing US government documents, but not for commercial documents. There's a high chance to be litigated. So combined release is also possible. If you're writing a story for a newspaper, then we take the legal, as one journalist said, so what you're saying is you guys take all the legal risk and I get all the fame. And the answer is yes. So we're specialized in dealing with the legal risks, in keeping the document up. People, when they attack legally, will attack the easiest part in a legal sense to attack, which is usually the provision of the full document and not the story. Now that depends a little bit on the country and the motivation. They actually may be motivated just to beat the journalist around a bit by wasting their time in court, and there's nothing precisely that we can do about that except to make it very clear that the material is not going to go away. So further court actions tend to just draw more attention to the material and becomes counterproductive.
And maybe another side comment that also comes in with this topic, I think. What we would like to ultimately promote is that journalists in general, at some point in time, release their sourcing material with us. At least everything that is not so confidential that it would really, or so critical for the source protection that it cannot be released. But in general, we think that it would be very good for the media if source material was disclosed at one place in full, so that every journalist can also be independently verified on his story, so that anyone would be able to research the same source material that the journalist used and come to the same conclusions and find out that what he's doing is a good job and that he's writing credible news stories and not some weird propaganda that you wouldn't be able to detect if you did not have the source. So that is one thing we would like to establish in the future, or one mechanism that we would like to offer. And that hopefully will become an incentive to release material with us then as well. Any other?
Hello. Do you have any material from China or Russia? And do you have personnel who know Chinese or Russian to evaluate your material?
I didn't hear the second part of the question.
Do you have people who know, other languages like Russian or Chinese to evaluate the material, or are you just working in these Western languages?
Yeah, so we do have contacts with people that know a variety of languages. So often if we get an important document in, we will find someone who knows that language. Sometimes that can be quite hard. And we do have documents in Chinese and Russian, some very important documents in Chinese. As an example, all the censorship keywords used by Baidu, which is the Chinese Google, censorship keywords used by state TV, censorship political logs of what things need to be censored and who needs to be contacted, propaganda activities related to the 60th Chinese Communist Party celebrations that are coming up. But yes, we need more people with non-European languages involved at a closer level, so they can be continually consulted. At the moment, it's a process of reaching out to friends of friends who might know that language. And we also need help with additional translations of the website itself, how to use it, and for sourcing, that can also be an issue when people are trying to source material from a foreign country and they don't know the language. That can often pose significant barriers. There are many former colonies, however, that do speak European languages that are not part of Europe, and we've seen a lot of documents from those which have been partially smuggled out by Europeans.
Hello. Sorry. Have you been trying to promote the kind of principle that government should publish all the documents automatically? So have you been trying to make things so that governments automatically make some documents like the CRS public? No? Did you understand anything?
The audio is a little bad. The question was if we promote open government, or if we...
have you tried convince governments to publish the data automatically without kind of being leaked, like you said about the CRS? That why don't we publish it automatically, as it's going to be leaked? So,
does anyone understand the question?
The audio is bad.
I think it was the question if you lobbied for automatic release of documents directly with government.
Yeah, so I think I understand what you're saying. You're suggesting after a time period, as an example, documents are automatically released to us, or in general? In general. Well, it'd be a great thing. Certainly, some in the United States have lobbied for things to be automatically declassified at particular dates and released. That doesn't seem like it will happen. There's too many forces that are pushing against it. It's mainly sort of arse covering. What happens if it goes wrong and one document is released? Someone gets blamed, but no one gets proper credit for all the good that is done. In Europe, I'm not sure what the situation with that is. For the CRS, certainly we've lobbied a bit, but others have done a lot of lobbying. But we are specialist leakers. You know, we work where the traditional civil society fails. And the Freedom of Information Act is an example of something that is abused and is failing. As an example, the EFF, through the legal system, tried to... There's a transnational treaty that has been plotted over the past 2 years in relation to copyright, ACTA. So we released the first documents about ACTA. It was not on the political agenda at all of any activists in this community or in developing world patent medicine. And the EFF then tried to FOI that material. Other groups tried to FOI that material in the United States. It was classified as a national security secret, even though it's just a copyright treaty, under the basis that United States copyright holders' positions might be marginalized in the negotiations and they wouldn't make as much profit. And the EFF just 1 month ago gave up on that case because it was their legal belief that the state saying that something was a matter of national security was extremely hard to break, because the court wouldn't be happy to open the document to see if it was as a matter of national security. So it is important to attack with two prongs. One prong is provide an official, if you like, leak system, which is the Freedom of Information Act, and then also, on the other hand, the unofficial system, which is people engaging in civil disobedience and smuggling out material that's been withheld from legal restrictions or just bureaucratic restrictions. To some extent, things like the Freedom of Information Act are there because if you don't legalize it, then it will all be done in I shouldn't say illegal, but in a way that is not managed by the law. So the more leaking there is, the more aggressive leaking there is, the more things like the Freedom of the Information Act are empowered.
Hi, I'm Kara with the Meta Lab. Less a question, more a suggestion, really. You talk a lot about the American situation, you know, Freedom of Information Act and all documents created by the government being not under copyright, which is awesome, but it's not the same way in most places of the world. And so I wonder if you have thought about creating a directory of the legal information for each country. I know this is a shitload of work and you'd need a legal expert in each country, but maybe you might want to start on that. So I can go and say, okay, I'm in Austria. I can know exactly what my situation is. What about government documents? What happens if I take a document from my corporation that I feel violates some ethical principle that I stand for, and I release this and I get fired as a result, or I get sued for having violated some kind of NDA or what have you? What would be my situation? What would be my, legal position, and so on? This kind of information for each country. Have you thought about doing something like that?
No, I haven't thought about it, but it's a very interesting idea. What we've found in the past in dealing with something that's analogous with sources is that each case tends to be so unique that we can't give someone a book and say, read this and your question will be solved. So I think what you're referring to, before releasing a document, you should come to us and talk to us about the specific situation. And we'll then speak to our lawyers, or we may already know the answer, and we'll come up with a tailored solution just for you. That's what we do with sources. We come up with some tailored way, some of our sources, a tailored way for them to get the information out safely and in a way which will have the maximum political impact. And I think for IT consultants, that should work as well.
This is a similar problem also with the usage of PGP for email encryption, for example. The problem is if you put some information out and you encourage someone to regard that information as paramount or as what is there and that's all you need, and if you read this, you understood all you need to take care of, then this has to be 100% complete. There is no possibility of a mistake in there or something missing that somebody hasn't thought of. So we are very careful with putting out guidelines that we advocate as use this and you'll be secure, use this and you'll be safe. All these things are very difficult. And similar, that's why we're not advocating the use of PGP, because too many people have a feeling of false safety when using email encryption, and then there's a mistake, and we would just rather encourage them getting in touch with us and clarifying how we can offer them the dedicated solution they need for their problem. But I understand that doesn't really scale very well for the common public. So
you are constantly talking about what kind of stuff is protected in the US. You have been doing it all evening, and it's great. And I think nobody now believes, oh, and this is the ground truth, and they are safe and all that. But this is about like general guidelines, general ideas. I was just thinking it might be good to have it.
Okay.
You know, because getting in touch with you may already be too much. It may already be more than I want to do.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, there are. I could now say use Tor, and we have an anonymous encrypted chat and these things. But I understand your point, and it's a valid point, and we'll happily think about it. And
we're not at all US focused. I'm an Australian. Daniel is German. We certainly have some US people, but the reason that we mention so much is just such a big body of people. And because of the past 8 years of war, there has been a lot of dissidents from the US that have come forward. And also it's seen as, in terms of its intelligence bureaucracy, as the most aggressive case. So if this is a case you can solve effectively, all the others are to some extent easier. That's actually not true. Places like North Korea are harder. But you can see that this aggressive case can be solved. The European countries are fairly easy. UK is, I mentioned these problems with publishing, but all the publishing problems, this is our problem. And we know how to deal with that. The sourcing problems, that's you got your problem, but we try and make it our problem as much as possible. If you're suggesting that you would like to do some research and find out what the situation is for various whistleblower protection laws in your country, or the classification laws in your country, and who those apply to. Do they apply to outside consultants? Do they apply to enlisted military? And most importantly, not what the law says, but what actually happens in practice. Because the law is just a piece of paper, and it's what the precedents and communal values and the expectations of society are that defines whether that law becomes more than a piece of paper to individuals in that society. Usually it's just a piece of paper because the real politic constraints are such that it can't be used.
Okay, we already had there are 2 minutes left. I guess if there's one more urgent question or any other questions, we'll be around anyways in the next few days. So thanks for your interest, for coming here tonight, even though it's so late and cold. We brought some T-shirts. Whoever wants to buy one, we'll have a few for sale here or the rest at the tent. I just hope I don't have to drive any of them at home again. So thanks again, and everyone have a first nice evening at HAR.
Sorry?
Prices for the T-shirts, medium, large, extra large, and girl shirts. Sorry. 20 euros.
20 euros. It all goes to a very good cause.
Yes.